Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Cincinnati City Councilmember Mark Jeffreys has led a remarkable life. He grew up the son of an immigrant and held a high school job scrubbing toilets before going to the University of Chicago and Georgetown. He ran major divisions in corporate America and launched startups. Then he turned his attention to his community. As a council member, he's driving innovative solutions to vacant buildings, public safety, and economic development. He's also standing up for marginalized neighborhoods and LGBTQ youth. We talked about the transition from the private to the public sector, how to solve big, hard problems, and so much more. Enjoy. Cincinnati City Council member Mark Jeffreys, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start, you've had an extraordinary life growing up on food stamps, climbing to the highest levels of corporate America, and now serving on your city council. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and how you found yourself in the position you are now?
Yeah, thank you for having me again. So yeah, I'm in my second term on Cincinnati City Council. I am not from Cincinnati originally. I actually grew up in New York. My dad is an immigrant, came here from Holland. Jeffreys is not a Dutch name, anglicized his name. And he didn't have anything. We grew up, he was a building superintendent, a janitor, and struggled a little bit at times with his health. And twice we were on food stamps, but I was fortunate. I had great public schools, had a union job, lost my mom when I was 15 and went to work as a union laborer. And as a security guard, among other things. And that really enabled me and propelled me to go to college. Went to college at the University of Chicago. I studied history undergrad. After college, I lived in Europe for a little bit and then worked on the Hill for a couple of years. Went on to work in the private sector in Asia, eventually went to business school at Georgetown, and then landed in Cincinnati for Procter & Gamble. So thought it was going to be 2 years. It's a very P&G story. To Cincinnati, and Cincinnati, I'm not sure. And it's just a great company. I spent ultimately 17 years there, ran different businesses, ran the Pampers business, Gillette. And then I decided several years ago to leave to start my own company. And so raised a round of money and started a company, eventually sold that company and then started another one. It's a tech company. And I still own it to this day. Along the way, when I was at P&G, I started getting more involved with the community. I actually built out a portion of our riverfront from a dilapidated parking lot into a portion of what's called Smale Park in Cincinnati, and found that incredibly satisfying. And my neighbor is our former congressman and mayor, David Mann. One day he said, "You should run for council." And thought about it a lot and decided to run. I was elected the first time, and I absolutely love it.
So tell me about the difference between, like running a global brand, presumably having a lot of people working for you that need to move quickly, with what can sometimes be at the local level, very little support, and you're working on potholes and trees and very local issues that are critical to a community, but are very different than running a global brand. Talking about the differences or the similarities.
Yeah, I mean, there's several things that are different and similar. The similar, P&G, like a lot of companies, is a big bureaucracy. And so you do have to understand how to navigate a bureaucracy and how to motivate people in a bureaucracy. I mean, I think we're a city manager form of government too. And so you have to understand how to motivate people in the administration to work for you, and it's not always by pounding them and everything. So I mean, there's those kinds of similarities in terms of bureaucracy. Obviously, in the private sector, you have a lot more flexibility, but what I find most energizing, same thing at P&G, was I get energized by delivering impact. And obviously the impact in business, I would wake up every day and look at my shipment number and see how I was doing, and whether I'm beating competition and all that. That's a very different motivation than obviously in the city. But I find the impact very meaningful, and it's what motivates me. The ability to see a problem, dissect the problem, engage with the community on a solution, and then build coalitions, which you also have to do in business. And as a result, implement something that actually can improve people's lives.
Tell me about what do your former colleagues think of this transition? I think you see some folks coming out of the private sector and they'll run for Congress or governor or, these sort of quote unquote higher level jobs. You don't see a lot that get down and work up at the grassroots level, at the street level. How's that conversation go?
Yeah, I mean, I think they greatly admire it because they recognize we really need good leadership. And what I hear from many people in the community is we need people like you who have business background, but then also entrepreneurial background and then nonprofit background to really serve in the community. And so I think they admire it. They shake their head and wonder why I would do it. We get yelled at about this issue or that issue. But I think they recognize that, look, we need leadership at all levels of our society. We need leadership in the private sector, nonprofit sector, and obviously in the public sector. And those leadership skills, I think, obviously can cross sectors. And I think my former colleagues at P&G recognize that. I joke with my staff often. I use a lot of P&G frameworks for analyzing issues and problem. Actually, my staff last week said it to me. I was jumping on something and he said, well, you always say a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And, the other one is what has to be true, this framework of P&G of like, okay, if you hit a barrier, instead of just saying, well, it's just too risky, or it's just not possible. This whole idea of what needs to be true. Like, okay, well, we would need X dollars. We would need more people. We would need to change the law. We would need to do this. Okay, let's open up the discussion and maybe think about things a little differently. And I find those frameworks apply whether you're at P&G on a $1 billion business or down at the local level, trying to literally solve crime on a street corner. It's the same type of mindset of problem solving.
Yeah, I've been having this conversation with more and more elected officials because I often feel like in our sort of Twitter culture, X culture, right? Like people define problems and get to solutions very quickly without sort of stepping back and figuring out how do you define the problem? What would need to be true? And public policy tends to rush forward without us ever having a real conversation about what's the goal of the goal here. Mm-hmm. And I feel like those frameworks are more valuable than ever in public policy making.
Yeah, I would say it's hard because obviously we're a society that social media and everything, they want an answer right now. There's a problem, we want you to solve it. But I think the other piece is great elected leaders enroll people in solving the problem so they feel a part of the solution as opposed to this top down, I'm going to tell you what the solution is. And obviously that's a lot more dirty. It takes a lot more time and it's a little less soundbitey for people. But I think there's a balance of both, right? Because you always have to show that you're acting, especially in cases of where there's public safety challenges, like how are you responding? Because there's a sense of urgency. But you also want to make sure you're enrolling people in the solution. I always say the end result is important, but the process in government is almost, I wouldn't say equally important, but as important. How you get there, how people feel like that they are a part of the process and part of the solution and energized by it.
How have you, on the issues that you're focused on, whether it's public safety or housing, how have you engaged people in the process so that they're a part of it and it's not just council member has an idea, we're going to go implement it, ready, set, go?
Yeah, part of it is I go out to the community a lot. We have community councils here in Cincinnati. They're basically neighborhood councils. I go to 2 to 3 a month. We have 52 neighborhoods, so that puts me at pretty much getting it done, rotating around every 2 years. And then actually, I'm on a campaign trail now. I'm literally walking the 52 neighborhoods. I walked 11 miles 2 days ago, just walking through neighborhoods and meeting people and talking to people. So a lot of it is that. I think you just showing up and caring and engaging them. But I'll give you an example on housing. We have a housing crisis, no different than any other city, right? Every city is facing the same kind of housing crisis. And initially, when I was approaching it and talking to people in the developing community, they were complaining, as developers do, about, well, it just takes too long to get my permit and inspection and this and that. And so I said, okay, let's benchmark versus other cities. We should be best in class versus any other city. So you come to Cincinnati, it's not taking longer to do any of that because time is money, right? But then we took a step back and said, well, actually, what we should do is we need to greatly accelerate housing, and we're producing about 1,500 units a year. We need to be much more. And so I enrolled my colleagues and the mayor and set forward what we call a big audacious housing goal, building 40,000 units in the next 10 years, which will be almost 3 times what we're doing now. And then going through this exercise I had a roundtable with developers a couple of weeks ago on what needs to be true. What do we need in terms of gap financing? What do we need in terms of subsidy? Do we need in streamlining regulatory approval, et cetera? And that's been a really meaningful way to engage all the stakeholders, right? Because it means the developer community, it means community councils, it means my colleagues, everyone has to have input. But we're hugely excited about that, about that endeavor.
And as you say, almost every city needs to build more housing. It's not a uniquely Cincinnati's challenge. But what have you found from those conversations that needs to be true? If every city wants to build 10,000 units or some number close to there, what are you hearing from the folks who build the housing of what they need to make that happen?
Yeah, of course, everyone has NIMBY challenges, right? People who are, and that's such a negative term in so many ways, but, a lot of people buy property in their neighborhood and, they buy it with a set idea of what that neighborhood is. And often they don't like change. And so I think you have to recognize that, and how do you engage people in that change to make sure that they're brought along. In our case with this 40,000 units, I've said, hey, look, at least 20,000, if not 25,000 should be downtown, because we can build as high as we want downtown and there's no barriers. And we have a lot of surface parking that could be easily converted to apartment dwellings with garage underneath, which we've done in several cases. And so that kind of tackles that issue of, okay, community opposition. So that's one of those issues is, okay, well, community opposition. The other is the where does this go? And are there zoning changes that we need to make? So we're looking at some older, what were manufacturing districts, and converting those to enable housing. So zoning is a whole nother kind of what needs to be true. And then the other is, I referenced it earlier, streamlining approval process, being best in class in terms of approving permits and the time it takes, because time is money. I talked to one developer recently who was building a house and said, yeah, I didn't get my permit for 5 months because the person was out on maternity leave and they didn't give it to somebody else. And he had to increase the cost of the price on the unit by $20,000. And so that directly affects building more housing that is affordable. So it's streamlining it. And then the last is going to be, having some gap financing, because the reality is construction costs have gone up more than 45% in the last few years. And, I said recently we had a development ahead of us, and without any subsidy, it was about a 3% return. And I looked at my high yield American Express savings. I'm like, I'm earning 3.6% return. I'm like, a developer can just put it in a zero risk, high yield and get more than here. Why in the world would they do it? And so those are the realities that I think we also have to confront, is how do we enable it and ultimately build housing of all kinds. We need housing of all kinds. We need market rate. We need workforce housing. We need income restricted housing.
How are you finding? I mean, I guess like, so what's the state of play for the economy in Cincinnati right now? You're obviously tied to a global economy. That economy is under a lot of stress with the chaos coming out of the Trump administration, high costs of borrowing, et cetera. What are you seeing on the ground in your city?
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate. We have a number of Fortune 500 companies that are headquartered here, Procter and Gamble being one of them, Kroger, Fifth Third, Western Southern. So a lot of legacy companies. We also have a lot of newer companies that are really growing. MedPace is a new company that's, has great new 70, $80,000 starting salary jobs, for folks. And so we're very fortunate that we have a fairly diverse economy in that way, different sectors, large and small. And so, obviously we have headwinds of inflation and interest rates, which impact the building of things such as housing. But at the same time, we're also trying to be clearer on our economic development strategies, specifically working with our port on, okay, how do we clear land for more development? And I'll give you an example. I've been working on, I'm a big outdoor enthusiast. I jokingly say that anyone Dutch is born with a bike, just like me, born with ice skates. And so I cycle everywhere. And we have a great vision for what's called the Crown. It's a 34-mile loop around the city, similar to the Beltline in Atlanta. And we've built about half of it already. And the other half is going to go through a portion of the city, which is historically very disinvested. It's called the Mill Creek Valley. It's very industrial. And these are really what they call themselves, the forgotten communities, because they haven't gotten investment. And so I've initiated a very deliberate project with those communities over the last year to really think about how do we design the communities? What do the communities want when the trail gets extended there? Because it's going to get extended. And we don't want just market forces to take over and then it's gentrified and the neighbors are just looking and saying what happened. And so we want to be a lot more deliberate about how do we bring economic development. What we've seen in Atlanta is they've added over $1 billion in economic value along their Beltline. And they've done it by having TIF, tax increment financing, along the whole Beltline. And then also they have a community development corporation that manages development. So we're looking at a similar structure. Could we do something similar, which would essentially allow you to capture the incremental value in a more wealthy part of town to use to build housing or other economic development in a town, in a part of the city that is historically very disinvested.
I should say we did the New Deal Ideas Conference in Atlanta, and I was really struck by the Atlanta 20 years ago and Atlanta today, and the amount of economic investment and housing and activation that occurred around that Beltline. It was remarkable to see.
Yeah, no, it's really phenomenal. I think it's a real model for a lot of other cities, and that's how we're looking to it. That's one of the beauties I find of the New Deal. I'm participating in the Housing Forum, and even I think it was last week or the week before, it was a great exchange and heard some wonderful ideas from other colleagues and already reapplying them. So that's super helpful.
What are the other issues? You've been deep on housing and economic development. What are the other things you're looking at during your time on council?
Yeah, one of the other ones that is near and dear to my heart is an issue around lead paint and lead poisoning. So my wife happens to be a pediatrician, and so I have 4 kids. They're all a little older now, but I'm fairly well versed in the impact of lead poisoning, especially on children under 2. Children under 2, their brain is being developed. And for those people who have little babies or children, you all know what kids under 2 are doing. They're crawling around and putting everything in their mouth. And the data on this is super clear in Cincinnati. And it's not too different than a lot of other older, especially Midwestern or cities in the East. We have almost about 1,000 kids per year who have severe lead poisoning, to the point that it impacts their IQ permanently. You can't get lead out of your system once it's in there. It impacts their IQ. There is our children's hospital, which recently was ranked #1 in the country has done a lot of research around the impact on education, attainment, on job, etc. So the impact is super clear on especially poverty, which we have a real issue in the city. And my point of view is we have no plan. We have a plan on lead pipes by 2035. I think the feds are mandating that we eliminate lead in lead pipes, but nothing on lead paint, which is where most of the damage is coming from. So I've reached out to a councilwoman in Cleveland, talked to her. I've talked to people in Louisville and Rochester, other cities, on how they've tackled this, and built a pretty broad coalition of people, faith leaders, because I think we need to show kind of a sense of moral outrage of how can we let this happen. The business community, because there's an economic case to be made, and obviously folks in the health community. And so we're going to require kind of a pretty significant investment, public, foundation, and private, in order to really tackle this issue, because it costs a fair amount to remediate lead from houses. And we can't just mandate it. If we mandate it, we're a city of 62% rentals. 62% of our city rents, which is phenomenal. It's hugely high. And if we just tell landlords, hey, you or anyone, you have to remove lead, that's $30,000 to $50,000, and they'll just displace a whole lot of people because they'll have to raise the prices in order to cover it. So we need some public-private foundation investment in order to make this possible. And so that's an issue that I would love to have a plan that's funded by the time I leave council. And, it's probably going to take 25, 30 years to resolve it, but at least we're going to make some incremental progress. And every kid that we can save from having that lead poisoning is going to have a really meaningful impact.
Yeah, it's one of those, the long-term impacts are so significant, but it's hard to identify the specific long-term cost to have them spend it up front. And so anything you can do, not only obviously improves lives, but it also could save long-term costs and see so much benefit to your community.
Yeah, completely.
Any other issues that you are working on that public safety or others that you think that the listeners need to know about?
Yeah, I focus a lot on public safety. My campaign motto is safer, cleaner, greener. That's kind of catchy. Because I think public safety is fundamental to everything. And for those of us who grew up at a time when I grew up in New York in the 80s, when crime was pretty bad and people leave. And, anytime we see a spike in crime, that's something to be really worried about, because if people don't feel like they can come downtown or, go out, then obviously it starts spiraling down. And so that's been a big focus of mine. I just did a police ride along actually on Saturday. I get out and try to see firsthand what's going on. We have put forward a pretty holistic, it's called Act for Cincinnati plan. Obviously, police is a core part of it. We're leveraging drone technology. Actually, it's super fascinating how we're leveraging it to be a first responder. So when police get a call, they'll send the drone out there. And what that does is give them advanced intelligence a little bit. So if somebody says, hey, there's somebody with a gun, and they'll get out there. A, there might not be a person, so that avoids a run. But B, they can see, okay, this looks like this person has this kind of gun or whatever, and it allows them to prepare. So I think that's super smart to leverage technology in that way to advance public safety. But the solution, I think all of us recognize, is that is not, it can't only be police. And the police will be the first person to say that, is you can't police your way out of a lot of these problems. So, we have a holistic initiative, especially now that we're in the summer. There's this thing called Rec at Night. It actually got recognized by the governor of Ohio as being best in class, where we bring kids in on Saturday and have activities and just making sure we're having productive things for them to do. And when we had issues at our transit center, we had an intervention and people greeting them and offering them jobs. And, so I think just thinking about, again, problem solving on public safety, very different, that it involves not just law enforcement, but it involves an environment, making sure that the environment is conducive to enabling productive activities. And so that's been a big focus of mine. And the cleaner part kind of relates to it. I recently passed a vacant building ordinance. We have 2,300 vacant buildings in Cincinnati. 83% of them had a police and fire run in the last couple of years, and they're vacant. There's no water turned on for 6 months. There's no reason for having anyone call the police or fire. And those buildings cost the city $8.5 million per year.
Wow.
And so we're now saying, all right, you need to register your building if it's vacant, and you have to have a maintenance plan. You have to figure out what the plan is to improve it, make sure it's secure, the grass is cut, people can't get in and out. And that goes into effect here in a couple of months. I think that'll have a really positive effect, not just on public safety, but also, frankly, it's just a question of fairness. People who live next to a vacant building, and it affects their property values, and it's really not fair. So I think those kinds of issues are, I'm excited for the impact of that ordinance in particular in the months ahead.
I think that's one of those problems that it faces so many communities, and that if we can find a model, and Cincinnati sounds like it may be one, it could, you're working at the local level, but you could have a national impact. And sort of going back to the beginning of our conversation about running global brands or US brands and territories, it's one way to innovate and then see the impact. You've also been a leader on LGBTQ issues. Can you talk about that? And also, I mean, I am old enough to remember when Ohio was a swing state, and there was some bipartisan compromise, and that's changed in recent years. And so, how that fits into the national, both your state and national conversation.
Yeah, this issue, I've been, I would say, an ally for many years. My brother, when I was younger, passed from AIDS during the AIDS crisis. And so very personally well aware of the impact at that time. It was pre-AZT and everything. And my eldest is actually trans. They are in their early 20s. And so that's been transitioned as a parent. And so I always say it's not my story to tell. That's my story as a parent of my experience to tell. So it just breaks my heart how we are attacking people for being who they are and who they love. And I think depending on, regardless of what your faith is, I'm a person of pretty deep faith. I think all major religions say to treat others, with dignity and with respect. And the bullying that's going on is really horrible. And so recently we passed post-Trump administration, post-Trump election, we passed some money for trans mental health with the spike of suicide among trans kids in particular. We said, hey, look, we have to do something. And my point on this is, I don't care if the kids are trans or if they have red hair and they're maybe making fun of, and that's why they're committing suicide, whatever it is, as a community, collectively, with a capital C, all of us should look at that when kids are committing suicide because they don't feel like they belong, that we should help them. And so help them with their mental health in this case. And so we passed that. Some of my colleagues had a little consternation because, post-election, and I said, no, these are our values. These are our values. And I think, we need to treat especially kids with, the care that they need. And so I'm hugely passionate about that issue. And and excited to continue to champion making sure people are treated with dignity and respect.
And what's been the sort of community's response to these efforts? It's become such a lightning rod issue in a way that we were hoping it would not be. And so I when you get out there, I know some of your colleagues had some concerns, but what's the community's response to your argument that we just need to care for each other and especially care for our kids?
Well, the community here in Cincinnati, just to be super clear, it's a very blue city, so Ohio, of course, is not, but Cincinnati is a very blue city. So broadly, very supportive. I mean, I think people recognize, and I like the way Governor Beshear across the river talks about this, too. And he's a Democrat in a very red state. And I think there's a way to talk about it that we can bring people together. And I think we have to identify more commonalities. And I think the commonality of treating kids and helping kids who are trying to commit suicide, I think we can all agree on that. That of course we should help these kids to make sure that they feel loved and valued and respected.
It just occurs to me. So you have 4 kids. You've been in private sector, nonprofit, and now government. Sort of, what advice are you giving them for how to go out and navigate this crazy world and make the impact that they want to make?
Yeah, I mean, they're all extremely different kids. One lives in Western Mass. That's the one who's trans, and they're just amazing. And they're trying to figure out. They just graduated from college a couple of years ago, and trying to figure out what's next. And then I have one who just graduated with a degree in sustainability. Say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's a little bit of a pun, obviously. And she's going to work on a national park as part of AmeriCorps. And then we have one at Oberlin who's studying performance violin and neuroscience. She wants to be a doctor. And then we have one at IU who wants to be a lawyer. And I think each are, the one who wants to be a doctor. My wife's a doctor, obviously, so she's kind of informed by that. And the others to different degrees. I think they see what's happening in the world. I think that in general, that generation of college, recently post-college, is just hugely engaged in issues of climate change because they realize that this is going to impact them more, and justice. And so even our son, who wants to be a lawyer, he wants to do more justice kind of work. And so I find it actually incredibly inspiring. People kind of poo-poo kids in college and after, but no, I think this generation is actually really inspiring. I think, they take really seriously the issues that we're confronting in this world and want to make an impact and have an impact. And so I just try to help them find their own way, whatever that way is, because it's not going to be my way, but hopefully by watching what I'm doing and what my wife is doing and learning and asking questions, and they can find however it is that they want to have their impact in the world.
Well, we love seeing your impact. We love having you as part of New Deal, and appreciate all the innovation and the tough stances that you're taking to push back against some pretty harmful things that are happening. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.